The rain poured so heavily that afternoon it blurred the glass walls of the mansion into a sheet of silver. Lightning flashed across the dark sky as Jonathan Brooks, a self-made millionaire from Charleston, South Carolina, stood in his home office staring absent-mindedly at the storm outside. He had built one of the largest luxury furniture companies in the United States, owned several properties, and was respected by thousands of employees. Yet despite all his success, loneliness had become the only thing waiting for him at the end of every day. He had convinced himself that money solved every problem worth solving, until one heartbreaking moment outside his own mansion shattered everything he believed. As he glanced toward the old oak tree near the back gate, he noticed someone sitting beneath it. Through the rain, he recognized the familiar blue uniform. It was his quiet housemaid, Grace Carter, soaked from head to toe, trying to shield a small white food container from the downpour while silently eating cold rice with trembling hands. She cried between every bite, wiping tears away with the sleeve of her uniform before anyone could see. Jonathan couldn't understand why the woman who worked inside a mansion filled with warmth and comfort would choose to eat alone in the freezing rain. Before we continue this emotional story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel if you believe kindness, compassion, and second chances can truly change someone's life. Your support helps us share more stories that touch the heart. Jonathan remained frozen behind the window. Every member of his household staff had access to the employee dining room, where warm meals were prepared daily. There was no reason for anyone to sit outside in such terrible weather unless they wanted to hide from something much deeper than the rain itself. Curiosity slowly overcame pride. Instead of calling security, he quietly grabbed an umbrella and walked across the wet lawn. As he approached, Grace hurriedly closed the food container and tried to stand, apologizing instinctively, although she had done nothing wrong. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and the sleeves of her uniform were patched together so carefully that they almost looked intentional. Jonathan noticed that the meal she was eating wasn't the freshly prepared lunch from the kitchen. It was leftovers that had clearly been saved from days before. Grace insisted everything was fine. She smiled politely, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they've forgotten what happiness actually feels like. Jonathan had spent years negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, and he knew when someone was hiding the truth. Yet something in her exhausted eyes convinced him not to push further. He simply asked her to come inside before she became sick. That evening, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about the scene beneath the oak tree. The image followed him through dinner, business calls, and late into the night. For the first time in years, his expensive mansion felt strangely empty while the memory of one lonely woman sitting in the rain refused to leave his mind. The following morning, he quietly asked Martha, the elderly housekeeper who had worked for his family for decades, about Grace. Martha hesitated before speaking. She explained that Grace had never complained, never asked for favors, and never accepted charity. She worked longer hours than anyone else and often volunteered for extra shifts. Whenever staff members offered help, she politely declined. Most believed she was simply shy, but Martha knew something others didn't. Several months earlier, Grace had been living a normal life in Columbus, Ohio. She worked as an elementary school teacher, loved her students, and dreamed of opening a free reading center for children. Everything changed in one horrifying night when a drunk driver crashed into her family's car. Her husband, Michael Carter, died before reaching the hospital. Their young daughter survived with severe spinal injuries requiring constant medical treatment that insurance refused to fully cover. The hospital bills climbed higher every week. Grace sold her home. Then she sold her car. Then every piece of jewelry her mother had left her. Eventually, there was nothing left except debt. She left teaching because the salary could no longer cover the medical expenses. She accepted work wherever she could find it, eventually becoming a maid hundreds of miles away while her daughter stayed at a rehabilitation center under the care of Grace's elderly aunt. Jonathan felt something tighten inside his chest. Millions of dollars sat untouched across his investment accounts, yet one of the people cleaning his home couldn't even afford fresh food. Still, he didn't want pity to become another burden for her. Over the next several weeks, he quietly began paying attention. Every morning Grace arrived before sunrise. Every evening, she left long after everyone else. She never wasted food. She carefully folded used plastic bags because she couldn't afford to buy new ones. She collected leftover bread that the kitchen planned to throw away, not for herself, but for homeless people she passed while taking the bus home. One rainy Friday, Jonathan made another discovery that left him speechless. After finishing work, instead of going home, Grace traveled nearly 2 hours by bus to a children's rehabilitation hospital in Savannah, Georgia. Curious but respectful, Jonathan followed from a distance. Inside one small hospital room sat a little girl no older than 8. Her name was Abigail Carter. Although confined to a wheelchair, she greeted her mother with the brightest smile Jonathan had seen in years. Grace instantly forgot her own exhaustion. She brushed Abigail's hair, read storybooks aloud, helped with physical therapy exercises, and laughed as if none of life's tragedies existed. Only after Abigail fell asleep did Grace quietly step into the hallway. She counted the remaining cash in her wallet. It wasn't enough to pay next week's therapy session. Jonathan watched from around the corner as Grace silently removed her wedding ring. It was the last possession connecting her to Michael. The next morning, she sold it. Jonathan later discovered the receipt while reviewing reimbursement paperwork accidentally mixed with staff documents. The amount she received wasn't even close to what the ring had once been worth. She sold memories just to buy hope. That realization broke something inside him. Jonathan remembered losing his own parents when he was young. Back then, neighbors had helped his struggling family survive. Somewhere along the road to becoming wealthy, he had forgotten that success meant very little if it couldn't ease another person's suffering. Instead of simply writing a check, he decided to understand the entire situation. His private investigators confirmed everything Martha had shared, and even more. Grace secretly donated blood twice a month for extra money. She skipped meals regularly to pay medical bills. She slept only 4 or 5 hours each night because she cleaned offices after leaving Jonathan's mansion. Despite everything, every reference from former employers described her with the same words. Honest, reliable, kind, selfless. Not one complaint. Not one disciplinary issue. Not one request for special treatment. Jonathan found himself asking a question he had never considered before. How many invisible heroes walked past wealthy people every single day without anyone noticing? He canceled an important business meeting and instead visited Abigail's rehabilitation center himself. The doctors explained that Abigail's condition was improving, but one specialized surgery followed by intensive therapy offered the best chance for her to walk again. The cost exceeded $180,000. Grace had managed to save barely 1/10 of that amount after years of impossible sacrifices. Driving home, Jonathan couldn't hold back tears. He had once spent nearly that much on renovating a guest house he rarely visited. That evening, he gathered his company's executive board. Instead of discussing profits, he announced a completely different initiative. A confidential employee hardship foundation would immediately begin helping workers facing genuine medical emergencies, housing crises, and family tragedies. No employee would ever have to choose between feeding their family and paying hospital bills again. No one knew that Grace had inspired the entire program. Days later, Jonathan invited Grace into his office. She entered nervously, assuming she had made a mistake. Instead, Jonathan placed a folder on the desk. Inside were fully paid invoices covering Abigail's surgery, rehabilitation, transportation, medications, and future educational expenses. There was also an offer, not charity, a new position managing the company's employee wellness program, where her background as a teacher and her compassion could help struggling families receive support before their lives fell apart. Grace stared silently at the papers. Her hands trembled. Years of carrying unbearable burdens suddenly became too heavy to hold. For the first time since losing Michael, she cried without trying to hide the tears. Not because life had become easier overnight, but because someone had finally seen her pain instead of merely seeing a maid. Months later, Abigail underwent the surgery successfully. Recovery was slow and difficult. There were painful therapy sessions, setbacks, and moments when hope seemed fragile. But Grace never gave up. Neither did Jonathan. Exactly 1 year after that rainy afternoon beneath the oak tree, Jonathan attended a special ceremony at the rehabilitation center. With therapists standing nearby, Abigail slowly rose from her wheelchair. One careful step, then another, then another. Grace covered her face, overwhelmed with emotion as her daughter walked into her arms. The room erupted in applause. Jonathan quietly stepped back, allowing the family to enjoy the moment without drawing attention to himself. For the first time in many years, he realized that the greatest return on any investment wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in restored lives, reunited families, and hope that refused to die. If this story has touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness still exists, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us humanity is never truly lost. Before this story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you had seen Grace eating alone in the rain? As Grace looked toward the old oak tree months later, now shining beneath a clear blue sky instead of a storm, she understood something she would never forget. Sometimes the darkest rain falls just before life gives us the sunshine we thought we'd lost forever. Jonathan had rescued one struggling family, but Grace had rescued something inside him as well, the compassion that success had nearly buried. Their lives crossed for only a moment beneath a storm. Yet that single moment proved that true wealth is never counted by the size of a bank account. It is measured by the number of broken hearts we choose to heal when no one else is watching.